If you've ever wondered why someone who hurt you keeps finding their way back, the answer isn't love and it isn't guilt. It's something far more calculated, and once you see it, you'll never misread a comeback the same way again. When a narcissist loses access to someone they have grown accustomed to controlling, something shifts internally that has very little to do with affection and a great deal to do with absence. Not the absence of a person, the absence of a function. For as long as the relationship lasted, you served a role. You provided attention, reaction, validation, conflict, reassurance, an entire ecosystem of emotional supply that the narcissist had come to rely on without ever consciously acknowledging the dependency. What most people don't realize is that when this supply disappears, the narcissist doesn't experience grief in the way most people understand it. They experience a vacuum, a disorienting absence of stimulation that their internal world is poorly equipped to tolerate. And that vacuum doesn't always announce itself immediately. It can sit quietly for weeks, even months, until something in their current life recreates the exact conditions that made you valuable in the first place. This is where the recency trigger comes in. The narcissist rarely returns at the moment of loss. They return later, when a new relationship fails to provide the same intensity of attention, when a new partner sets boundaries the narcissist didn't expect, or when a quiet evening suddenly surfaces a memory of how reliably you used to respond to them. At first, it appears like longing, a message that seems to come from nowhere, wrapped in nostalgia or concern. But the timing reveals something else entirely. It is rarely about you specifically. It is about what your presence used to provide and the sudden, uncomfortable awareness that nothing currently in their life is providing it. Pay attention to what happens next, because the explanation they offer for returning is almost never the real one. When a narcissist frames their return as unfinished business, it carries an emotional weight that feels almost convincing. There's an implication that something meaningful was left incomplete, a conversation that never happened, a misunderstanding that was never resolved, a connection that deserves one more chance. What most people don't realize is that this framing is rarely about the relationship itself. It's about control that was never fully relinquished. The narcissist's sense of, quote, unfinished business is not a reflection of emotional incompleteness between two people. It's a reflection of their own discomfort with an ending they did not orchestrate or fully approve of. This is where the familiarity advantage becomes relevant. Returning to you isn't just emotionally convenient, it's strategically efficient. They already know what apologies you respond to. They know which memories soften you, which insecurities reopen old doors, and which boundaries are likely to bend under enough pressure and enough time. Most people miss this warning sign because it doesn't look like strategy. It looks like familiarity, like comfort, like two people who simply, quote, know each other. But familiarity in this context isn't intimacy, it's intelligence, gathered over time and now being used. Every time a narcissist re-enters your life after a period of absence, what looks like a reconciliation attempt is often something far more calculated, a test. Not a test of compatibility, and not a test of whether the relationship could genuinely work this time. A test of you. Specifically, a test of whether the conditions that allowed them to operate freely before are still in place, or whether something has shifted in your willingness to accept the same patterns. This is where the manipulation begins, quietly, almost imperceptibly. The return often starts small. A message that requires minimal commitment. A comment that tests whether you'll respond warmly or with distance. An appearance in a shared social space that seems casual but is calculated to gauge your reaction. Each of these micro interactions functions as a probe, low risk, low cost, but highly informative. What most people don't realize is that the narcissist is not gathering information about whether they want to return. They already know that. What they're gathering is information about you. Has your guard dropped? Are you lonelier than before? Have you started questioning whether things really were as bad as you remembered? If the testing return produces softness, hesitation, or warmth, the narcissist now has the data they need to escalate. Alongside this testing process runs something equally calculated: the narrative reset. By the time a narcissist circles back, they've often constructed an entirely revised version of the relationship's history. The conflicts that defined the ending get minimized or reframed as mutual misunderstandings. Their role in the breakdown becomes vague, softened, sometimes rewritten entirely as something they've grown from or reflected on deeply. This is exactly what they want you to believe: that time has changed them, that the version of them returning now is fundamentally different from the version that drove you away. And because most people genuinely want to believe that growth is possible, this narrative often lands exactly as intended. But pay attention to what's missing from this reset narrative: specific acknowledgement, concrete description of what happened, genuine accountability that doesn't immediately pivot toward what they've learned or how they've changed, but simply sits uncomfortably with what they did and the impact it had. Most people miss this warning sign because the absence of something is much harder to notice than the presence of something. And the narrative reset is built entirely on convincing presence, warmth, reflection, apparent vulnerability, strategically positioned to draw attention away from what isn't there. There's a quiet function you serve in a narcissist psychology that has nothing to do with romance and everything to do with measurement. Long after a relationship ends, you don't simply disappear from their internal world. You become a reference point, a benchmark against which every subsequent person gets unconsciously compared. What most people don't realize is that this comparison isn't usually flattering, and it isn't really about you as a person. It's about function. Did the new person provide as much attention? Were they as easy to influence? Did they tolerate as much, forgive as quickly, or stay despite as many red flags? When new partners fail to replicate these dynamics, often because they have healthier boundaries or simply haven't been conditioned the way you were, the narcissist doesn't necessarily long for you specifically. They long for what worked. This is where the comparison function quietly fuels a return. The known quantity becomes appealing again, not because it was good, but because it was familiar, and from their perspective, manageable. Then there's something else, something most people never connect to the return at all: the ego wound of being replaced. If you move on visibly, especially sooner than the narcissist anticipated, this often triggers something disproportionate to the actual relationship's importance. At first, it appears like jealousy, like genuine hurt. But the hidden reason behind this reaction runs deeper. It's not about losing you. It's about what your moving on represents: irrelevance. The possibility that you are doing fine, perhaps even better, without them. Pay attention to what happens next in these situations. The return often isn't warm at all. It can be competitive, dismissive, or strangely intense, driven less by desire and more by an urgent need to disrupt whatever stability you found. By now, a pattern should be emerging, one that repeats with uncomfortable consistency across these dynamics. The return, the warmth, the eventual withdrawal, and then, sometimes, the return again. What most people don't realize is that this cycle isn't a series of failed attempts at reconciliation. It's a mechanism, and a remarkably effective one. Psychological research on reinforcement has long shown that unpredictable rewards create stronger attachment than consistent ones. Inside a toxic relationship, this plays out as a cycle of withdrawal and re-engagement that keeps the emotional stakes perpetually high. You never quite know which version of them you'll get, distant or affectionate, dismissive or attentive, and that uncertainty itself becomes the hook. The relationship's instability isn't a flaw in the dynamic. It is the dynamic. This is exactly what they want you to believe is just how things are between you. Unpredictable, intense, hard to walk away from. But underneath, it's a structure that keeps you reaching, hoping, and available, simply by never letting the door fully close. Which brings us to the final piece, the reason a clean ending almost never happens. Most people miss this warning sign because it doesn't look like anything at all. It looks like silence, like distance, like things simply fading. But a narcissist rarely delivers genuine closure because closure transfers power. It says clearly and finally, this is over, and offers nothing more to negotiate, revisit, or reopen. Instead, the door stays slightly ajar, a vague goodbye, an unresolved thread, a we'll see instead of a no. Not because they're unsure, but because certainty for you is the one thing they're least willing to provide. When you step back and look at the full pattern, the supply vacuum, the recency triggers, the rewritten history, the testing returns, the comparisons, the ego wounds, the cycles of withdrawal and re-engagement, and the deliberate absence of closure, what emerges isn't a story about love that couldn't quite let go. It's a system, a consistent, predictable system designed to preserve access, regardless of how that access serves you. What most people don't realize is that every return follows the same underlying logic, even when the surface details change. The apology may sound different. The timing may vary. The story about what's changed may evolve. But the function remains identical, restoring a source of attention, validation, and control that was never meant to be permanently lost. This is the hidden reason behind nearly everything discussed here. The narcissist isn't returning to a relationship. They're returning to a role, one in which they hold more power than they currently hold anywhere else, with someone who already knows the script, already understands the patterns, and has historically been willing to play along. Recognizing this pattern doesn't make the emotions involved any less real. The nostalgia, the hope, the warmth that surfaces during these returns, all of it can feel genuine in the moment because on some level, for them, it often is. People can simultaneously want comfort and want control. They can miss someone and still be incapable of offering them anything healthier than what came before. But intention and impact are different things, and patterns, examined closely enough, tend to reveal themselves regardless of how convincingly each individual moment is framed. The next time someone who has caused harm reappears, wrapped in nostalgia, reflection, or quiet urgency. The most useful question isn't, have they changed? It's what specifically is different this time. Not in tone, not in words, in behavior, in accountability, in the actual structure of how things would unfold if you said yes. If the answer is nothing, if the only thing that's changed is the timing, the circumstances, or how much they currently need what you once provided, then the pattern hasn't ended. It's simply beginning again. And now, at least, you know exactly what you're looking at.